Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the new lecture. As you know, we are in these days studying this chapter, chapter number 8 from the book Introducing Translation Studies. And so far we have discussed point uh, dot 1, dot 2, and then point number 1 to point number 4, and today we are going to discuss these things: the ideologies of the theorists, other perspectives on translation and ideology, a few remarks on case study, summary of the chapter, and discussion and research points. And with this, we shall be finishing this chapter, inshallah. So let's start. The ideologies of the theorist, and we before I say anything about these ideologies of the theorist, I just want to remind you what we have discussed here. We have so far discussed here three major approaches, trends that emerge out of the cultural and ideological turns in translation studies. Number one, where the translation was studied as rewriting. Number two, translation, relationship between translation and gender. And number three, the post-colonial translation theory. So those who are writing, or those who are doing research on these areas, so they have also ideologies. So this is the point, the ideologies of the theorists. Uh, you see the examples given here. Of course, we have discussed Lee Fife's work. We have also indicated to the work of Trivedi and Basnet, and also Sherry Simon and Spivak and Niranjana and so on and so forth. So we see that these theorists, of course, naturally, they also have some ideologies in their mind. How these ideologies constitute is a big question, perhaps which cannot be our topic here in this lecture. At least we can discuss this question, or we can also try to understand how to find the answer to this question of the factors that make the ideologies. But the examples, the flaunting manipulation, when you manipulate and you also show up and you also tell the people that I'm proud of this committed translation project was an ideology, very explicit and clearly spoken about. They did not hide this ideology. Simon's book, in the beginning of the book, she put this aim in front of her: casting the widest net around issues of gender in translation. And if you deeply philosophically analyze this objective, casting the widest net around issues of gender in translation, you can understand that the author from the very beginning was not unbiased, and she was biased because she has put this objective in front of her. And then, of course, move translation studies closer to translation cultural studies. So it is also an agenda, or this is also an ideology. I think this could be very interesting discussion, not in translation studies, in literary criticism, in literary writings, in religious interpretation, in social interpretation, in language as well, the language structure, I mean the language discourse that's emerged out of writing on certain topic. I hope I'm little bit going away from the main topic, but this could be very interesting thing to ponder and to, of course, keep in your mind as a researcher. uh, Among the examples is also attack on linguistic theories of translation. So Basnet, in her book Translation Studies, was openly dismissive of the linguistic theories of translation. and that is can be considered her ideology or her agenda. So when we talk about the ideologies, we also talk about the ideologies of the persons, the individuals, those who are influencing on some academic discipline. uh, Anyways, the this widened cultural approaches, yet element of conflict and competition between approaches also is there. If you just think about the way Leafweaver is describing translation as a writing, and the way translation and gender feminist translation approach is trying to do that, they are also conflict in agendas. Sherry Simon is trying to drag translation studies toward cultural studies, or perhaps the agenda was to make one branch of translation studies as one branch of cultural studies. So there are, of course, always there is a conflict among the theorists, and they have different agendas. Differences of perspective is part of the rewriting process described by Lee Fever. Of course, this is also very important. I tell you one thing: in translation studies, as we shall discuss, as we shall come to this point after some time again. But remember that this concept of rewriting generated a lot of other dimensions as for the translation research is concerned. Now, the author Jeremy Monday himself is confessing that rewriting in this book is a kind of manipulation, my agenda, and how it happens actually with every author, because he, of course, Jeremy Monday, selected certain material from different sources, and the language style that depicted these ideas, and he also focused on some parts, ignoring the other or compromising other parts, or he preferred, although I think he is Spanish, his origin is Spanish, but he is working in England. So, but he has preferred English books over the Spanish written. Maybe I'm not sure about that, because we see that he is giving English references more than any other references. So this is also, a kind of manipulation or an a unconscious agenda that is reflected in his book. Um, the cultural turn is attempt by cultural studies to another, kind of aspect of ideology or agenda or manipulation, that this cultural turn can be considered an attempt by cultural study to colonize the less established field of translation studies, because at that time, in early 90s, translation studies was not very strong, fully integrated discipline, academic discipline. So this could also be taken in this way. Post-colonial writers have their own political agendas, as we can discuss. For example, Spivak, his focus is on feminist side, and Niranjana's focus is on the interventionist approach, and on the other side we see that the Goddard, the famous writers, the focus is on, on being proud by manipulating the text, the target text, in the process of translation. The post-colonial writers have their own political agenda. My dear student, we can really, we should rather try to exert and try to use our mind to understand this very important aspect, because this aspect can help us understand other phenomenon where people are differing, and we can, or we can relate these differences to many other things. Okay, with this we can now move to the next other perspectives on translation and ideology. um, the the crux of all these rewriting: ideology, agenda, post-colonialism, gender, examination of power, and other contexts of translation. Power and ideology in other contexts of translation. The examples are here: Vinoti, rethinking translation, discourse, subjectivity, ideology, has discussed foreignization and domestication. We'll discuss this in the next chapter. Von Flotto's Translation and Ideology is a complete, very interesting book, and you can see the list here that the people are writing on this subject from different aspects. The concept of ideology itself, you see, in the area of research, everything is questioned, everything is is doubted, everything. What do you mean by ideology? So the concept of ideology itself varies enormously from its neutral coinage that refers to a new science of idea. That was the origin of this concept of ideology. New science of ideas to be used. And then we have this false consciousness, misguided thinking, manipulation. These are the negative meanings of the ideology, and there are many positive meanings as well for this word ideology. So the concept itself, describing the concept or interpreting the concept in different contexts by different people in different societies in different circles, it has also some kind of manipulation or agenda or ideology. The word ideology is driven by another ideology, and then we discuss the meanings of first ideology and the second ideology, and so on and so forth. And all these questions are relevant in the area of research and even in the area of translation studies. Research from an ideological perspective is interested in or uncovering manipulation in target text, of course, because of translators' conscious ideological elements of the translation and environment. That is the main point that we are referring to time and again, such as pressure from publisher, editor, institutional pressure, or governmental circles, and so on and so forth. There is another aspect of this translation and ideology is the question of censorship in countries, authoritarian regimes where the martial laws or where the dictatorship is, and the most obvious example of ideological manipulation, the example quoted here in this book, are the Nazis, Germany, when they banned on certain type of books, on translation of books, and then the reviews in the authorized press supported the racist policy. They of course banned the democratic views. They only published or supported the racist views and the racist writers, and of course patronized them through different kinds of patronage that we have discussed in rewriting. And then eliminating all elements, or maybe the intervention, not the Niranjana's intervention, general intervention, is the eliminating all elements alien to German character that were felt to be characteristics of foreign literature. This can be one example, but this, of course, our knowledge about this is not too much, but I think we can see here in our society that it's not good or bad. It is just that this what is happening here, that there are books that cannot be published, there are authors that are not accepted in our society, and hence of course their translations are not encouraged, or rather discouraged, and these kind of books, they don't have patronage in our society. You can see this kind of censorship in media, you can see this kind of censorship in educational institutions, you can also see this kind of censorship in in many other countries. I don't want to mention the names of the countries. This not mentioning the names of the country here again itself is as a kind of a censorship that I feel, that I cannot mention the names of these countries, but I can talk about my own country, because Alhamdulillah we have freedom here in our country to criticize what is happening in our society, of course, to a certain level, because after that level things move. So the censorship also, it has levels here and there. But the situation in our country is much better. On the disparity of power between languages, another aspect of ideologies or translation. Focus of research on disparity of the power between languages. On the research is focusing on how powerful is the language A, and how powerless is the language B and C, and so on and so forth. And most of the research in the modern time is revolving around the English, the growth of English globally in non-literary genres. Of course, uh, in the modern time, the growth of English in non-literary genres is marvelous, and the research has focused on this area to of course understand the whole situation. Dominance of English scientific and academic style. I think we also know that. You see, I am delivering this lecture most of the time in English, and there are a couple of reasons. There are very strong reasons for that. I think you should raise this question in the class, and I would like to say something when you ask me this question. Language imbalance and the economic and political power behind it has been a constant backdrop to translation through the ages. Greek, Latin, of course, if we go into the history, we also find the same phenomenon. Dominance of the academic discourse of English is an increasing trend within the field of translation studies itself, which is giving cause for great concern, not here in our country like Pakistan, but also in other countries in European countries. Between European languages and English, there is uh, there is a kind of now there is a kind of competition which has started recently. Okay, with this we can come to the summary of this chapter. Varieties of cultural studies in translation studies, of course. Then linguistic theories of translation have been sidelined, and attention has centered on translation as cultural transfer. Translation as rewriting, studying the power relations and ideologies existing in the patronage and poetics of literary and cultural systems that interface with the literary translation. Translation and gender, making the feminine visible in translation. Translation and post-colonialism, with examples from Spivak, Niranjana's power relations in the translation of the colonized people. A conclusion here is that every theory in this cultural turn, almost one way or the other, revolving around the power and pressure, the relationship of power, the nature of the power relationship between languages, power relationship between translated text and and the original text, power relationship in between this and that, and then of course the other emerging factors or other original factors that are influencing the whole scenario. So whatever is, you see, the center is power relationship, and what else is around is the outcome of this phenomenon. A case study, this the author has included a translation of Punjabi novel, which is Madi the Diva, which was published in 1964 by Gurdial Singh, and it was translated in 1991 with the title The Last Flicker. And he has two three points I want to say here. One is that the translator has used uh, mm, two sociolect, the American, and he has mixed these two social acts, one the American and the Canadian, and he has also given the examples, and I hope You have gone through these examples, and we can discuss, of course, these examples when we meet. But the most important thing which I would like to mention here is the uh, is the word that relate to the kin relationship in this Punjabi village Punjabi culture, where Babu, he has of course maintained the word Bapu. I'm sorry, Bapu did not translate it. It's a mixture of strategies, but he has uh, translated the word chachi with the auntie and so on and so forth. So we can see that the case studies tells us the relationship, the other social factors that are influencing this translation, and also the patronage provided by the Sahitya Academy Indians in India for the translation of, because they wanted to promote the translations of this another factor, which is the patronage, the economic patronage also, which of course wanted to, and of course they also dictated one way or the other, directly or indirectly, consciously or unconsciously, the translation strategy, the how this novel should be translated, because they wanted to make it acceptable to the readers in the West, American and the Canadian readers. So questions, there are many questions in this case study, but through this case study we can conclude that the uh, rewriting the concepts, that the rewriting concepts or the ideology in translation is sometimes becomes so visible, and that become very important, and that influence. Now we, after that we can come to the function of translation, that the translated text, how it affected the minds of the readers, as for their images about the original uh, the people or the original society. In this case, it is one village of Punjab, uh, and also the story's background is 1964. It was published in 1964. That means 10 years before 1964. That was the situation in that village, maybe most of the time. So this also contribute in creating image among the readers when they read the translated text. Okay, we also have luckily, because the Jeremy Monday's his style is very attractive one for me. I like it. In the end of the each chapter, he gives you food for thoughts as researchers, and discussion and research point. He calls this discussion and research points. I would like to read these discussion and research points out here in this lecture, and maybe we can discuss some of these points in the class with a little detail. Number one is Lefevre sees translation as potentially the most influential form of rewriting. How far do you agree with him? Compare this with examples taken from other forms of rewriting. So here the discussion point is that on the one side, of course, he has that the most influential is translation. So do you agree with him or not? So compare this with film adaptations, anthologization, historiography, etc., education, some other points as discussed by Niranjana. Second point is the Lefevre identifies three factors: professionals, patronage, and politics, which control the literary system. Examine how each functions in your own culture and which seems to be most important. Are there other factors you would add? Uh, this question has two parts. One, of course, examine how each functions in your own culture is, of course, we can theoretically discuss it. But the second part is, are there other factors you would add? I think this I would expect from you to give your ideas related to the second part of the question. Number three is, should women writers ideally be translated by women only? And what about male writers? Look at published translations and their prefaces to see how often this could become an issue. We can discuss the first part of the question when we meet in the class, but for the second part of the question, of course, is a good guide for your further for your research, actually for your thesis. Look at published translation and their prefaces to see how often this could become an issue. I mean, translation, text written by women are translated by women, or text written by women and translated by men, and vice versa. And what are the outcomes of these two combinations and comparison, and then conclusion in the light of the ideologies, agendas, manipulations, etc. Question number, or the point number four, is look for examples from translations in various times and locations that reveal gender bias. How is that bias revealed? Is there a pattern to these examples? How might the translation have acted differently? This can be, if we really focus on this discussion point, this can be converted into a very interesting topic for PhD, because this is a big question. It's a big point that needs a strong and rigorous research. How far do you feel Barbara Goddard is justified in flaunting her manipulation of the text for feminist purpose? What is your take on that? What is your opinion about that? I think this question should be. I would like to discuss this in the female campus. Or Niranjana is justified for her interventionist approach. Here, of course, male and female both are important, because Niranjana is suggesting this idea and interventionist approach on the part of the translator. Discussion point number six is, what research work has been carried out on post-colonialism and translation in your own country and languages? Do the results tie in with those discussed here? Frankly, my dear student, as for the Urdu is concerned, and my knowledge, and I have little knowledge about what has been written on the Urdu as for this post-colonial translation theory is concerned, it's very little. But in Arabic, people have produced very good literature on this topic, post-colonial translation theory. Number seven is, how far do you agree with Niranjana that translation studies has been overly dominated by Western theories? If this is true, how can or should the situation be changed? A big question. I think understanding this question itself is shall be an achievement for us, because the level of translation studies here in Pakistan is still in the beginning. We are still living in the era of linguistically driven translation theories. The linguistic theories in translation are dominating here, and I think this is quite natural, because this is what exactly happened in other countries, where now translation studies has developed tremendously. But as I said, just understanding the question would be a good achievement on our part. Point number eight is, in what ways might the researcher's own ideology conditions the choice of analytical tools and the relation to cultural theory? I think I gave you some ideas, or some indicated to this point, and we can have a discussion on this point. It's very important. Last one is, the ideology has often been understood in the sense of manipulation in translation studies. Look at the recent volumes in this area. What definitions are given for ideology? What are the researchers' assumptions about how ideology is manifested in translation? Is there a pattern to the findings of the different studies? This can be a very, very interesting topic for a research article. And the ways the path is very clear. If one of you is interested in writing on that, I can help, because the point here is the definition of ideology in the writings of translation studies scholars. So the focus is on the translation. The data is available, the writings, the books are almost available, and they can be collected. Not only article, I think, keeping in view the abundance of literature in this area, I think it can be converted into research thesis. But remember, it would be just a theoretical work. No practicality is involved here, just for except for a few examples to also taken from the relevant writers. With this, this lecture ends, my dear students, and you have the next advanced reading from this. Of course, now the next article is in Arabic, so نحن اخترنا هذا البحث العلمي لكم، وعنوان هذا البحث التصرف الأيديولوجي في الترجمة مصطلحا ومفهوما. فأنتم تقرؤون هذا البحث من البداية إلى ما قبل المستوى التركيبي. هناك عنوان جانبي في البحث أظن 5-6 صفحات، بعد 5-6 صفحات، والعنوان المستوى التركيبي. فأنتم تقرؤون الصفحات ما قبل المستوى التركيبي. فشكرا جميلا لحسن استماعكم، ونحن إن شاء الله نلتقي يوم الثلاثاء بعد استماعكم إلى هذه الحصة، ونناقش الأسئلة ونتبادل الآراء. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.